Stanley. I'm here with Wes Warren. We're with Whitehall Management. We want to talk today about some of the fairy tales surrounding private equity, big prices for practices. Wes, what do you think about that?
Well, DSO's been around. DSO-backed private equity has been around, forever. I mean, but obviously over the last 15 years, or so, they started, about in the mid 2000s, started offering ridiculous sums of money for practices. They were coming in just throwing around money, and it was wow, and it was such a good deal. A lot of people did it, and we had a lot of doctors do it. But there's been a lot of changes. A lot of things have happened. A lot of other new players come on board, and we're seeing a lot of myths out there and fairy tales about this whole, selling out to a DSO.
You're saying it was a good deal.
It was a good deal at one point. And first fairy tale number one is it's not a good deal anymore. What they're paying for your practice is not a good deal. They're having, on average, you stay back and work for your practice, your own practice, for between 2 and 5 years, depending on which DSO you're talking to. They'll typically give you 70–80% of the value of your practice. I say 70–80% of last year's collections, with the holdback. And a lot of them are still doing that, and that might probably go away, but a holdback of another 20% if everything goes well over those 2 years or 3 years you're working for them. The problem is not a good deal. Most of these offices net quite a bit of money, and you're going to work at 30%. If you just kept the practice, kept the net those 3 years or those 2 years, and kept all the tax breaks you get as an owner, being able to write off stuff and be aggressive with depreciation. Well, I mean, that's not even being aggressive. You can do that. You lose all that. So your taxable income goes up. But even without that, if you just calculate what you're making and sell the practice for 70%, which you can get in this market, you can get 70, even 80%, we see, just selling it to another dentist, and you don't have to stay back. Very rarely see practices you actually come out better selling to a DSO. Most of your practices net quite good, and you're basically financing their purchase by working for them. Essentially it's a terrible deal financially. I don't see any deals really penciling out very well.
Can I just comment on this? We've seen so many DSOs come along, and if you drive down the road, you can see the detritus of failed efforts, companies that ultimately went bankrupt. And so now we have them starting up every day somewhere. And so you're going to get a call from one of two people. They're proven, there's a zillion practices, and they're going to pay you just a tiny bit more, maybe, than you might sell your practice for in a good market. Right. Then there's the new person, the new guy, the DSO that's starting up, and they're desperate to get it going. And they got the suits out there promising. It reminds me of realtors trying to sell a new residential home that's on fire. It's burning down. It's almost burnt to the ground. And so they're trying desperate. They'll promise you whatever you want. And it makes you want to hear from them again. I hope they call me back, because they talked about my practice being worth what I thought it was worth. I've been at this 40 years. I thought my practice would be worth millions, and they're the only ones talking millions. Everybody else talks really not much. And so it's very seductive. Let's make no mistake about it. I have doctors that literally look forward to the monthly call to have their self-esteem pumped up and hear that somebody will pay $1.8 million or whatever for their practice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they hear it. I mean, this is what happens is You get on the call, they say, we'll give you 100% of, and it's $1.8 million. And you're like, wow, but we got to do a little, got to dig through your numbers, and they do that. And then the deal changes. And this
As it
is
solidifies.
right. As you get closer, you'll start hearing these holdbacks and, well, we'll hold back this for 2 years as long as the practice doesn't fall. You'll also, if you're dealing with the real characters of the business, you'll start hearing about getting stock instead of money. And
Promised cash paid in stock.
right, that's usually a bad sign. Usually, when they start offering stock, it's not good.
And here's how driven they can be. First of all, you got to realize what's in it for them. They may take a practice that, like yours, selling for 1.5 times earnings. By the time they've assembled 100 or 200 practices, they're selling it for 20 times earnings. And so they literally become billionaires off your back, so to speak. The question you're always presented with, is it branded or is it unbranded? In other words, do you get to leave your name on it? That tells you how driven they are. They're trying to put it all together so they can stand it up straight, pull it away, go public, or sell it to a pension.
Another private equity firm. Yeah.
Right.
You gotta watch out when you go this route, because as you get near the signing the paperwork, the deal all of a sudden changes. So you'll hear all the pretty things, everything that you want to hear, but the fact remains, why would I, as a businessman, why would I pay way more for your practice when I can just go on the listing table and find one that's virtually the same and just buy it for 70%? Why would I pay, 40% more? The only reason why they're doing that is to get you to actually work for them and stay back and stabilize the practice. So technically speaking, it's not a good deal. It just is not. It used to be, and I'm sure there's some of them out there, especially if they're trying to get a foothold, that'll overspend. And so you might be able to find one of those, but we just don't see those very often anymore.
With the unbranded, where you get to keep your name and not become something dental. This is fairy tale number 2. They tell you you don't have to change a thing. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, that's the famous line to get you to want to stay back, to want to work for them. Remember, the goal for them is for you to stay there, to stabilize the practice. And so they blow in your ear, we're not going to change a thing. We just want you to do what you're doing. You'll hear that over. Just do what you're doing. Don't change it. Do what you're doing. Nothing's going to change. That I have not seen be true. The biggest train wrecks I've ever seen in dentistry has been when private equity has taken over a dental office. You rarely see a dental office plummet to earth financially. I've had offices doing $300,000 or $400,000 a month, and as soon as the DSO takes over, within that we're hitting those numbers for years, and as soon as they take over, the thing drops to $200,000 a month, $150,000 a month, because of all the changes that they make. It's been a mixed bag. So some they're right, they don't change a lot. They bring a lot to the table, but most of our people don't like being an employee in their own practice. Even the ones that don't change a lot, they do change enough of the things in the practice that our owners just don't like being there anymore. They can't wait to get out of there. And that experience, having to work back in your own practice has been miserable for quite a few of our doctors.
Let's go the other way for a second, Wes. I bet if we gave a DSO equal time on this program, they could drag up 2 or 3 people that would testify how incredibly wonderful it was. We don't argue that. That's very possible. It's just been our own experience that we're talking about.
Everybody that you can always drag somebody out. And I'm not saying that there aren't DSOs that aren't doing wonderful things. I'm sure they are. I just haven't seen it. So
they can go through this romance stage, at the beginning, where they talk you into it, the big numbers promising don't change, blah, blah, blah. And you get into it, and they're very careful about not hitting you too fast with what you can't handle. But you wake up one day and realize, like you said, you're an employee.
Our doctors, Whitehall people, is probably a type of dentist that maybe they know how to run a practice. They're really good at it. They believe in some principles. If you're a real Whitehall follower, you kind of believe in the principles of a staff-driven practice,
Consumerism.
And consumerism and stuff that a lot of DSOs don't really believe in, quite frankly. And so when you watch them change the practice fundamentally from how you grew it, it's hard. It's hard for our people.
When I see it played out, I get to occasionally run into somebody that at one time was part of one of these things. And they'll talk about how a practice morphed from a truly consumerized practice into what could probably only be described as a timeshare operation. I mean, they're hard selling. Got to sell a certain amount of hygiene, certain amount of restorative. You got to push these products.
Yeah.
To say that you get to be who you've always been might be a little bit ambitious, a little bit optimistic.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about number 3. Number 3 is fake growth. That's what we would call fake growth.
What I call
Business
it.
people might call it EBITDA or
Yes.
these other things. But
So yeah, make no mistake, what they're good at is managing overhead and making a net for themselves, and maybe growing on an incremental level. But if they're promising that they know how to double and triple a practice within 16 months, and you're going to see things like you can't imagine, that's we have not seen.
they could clear out the practice. They can run off all the patients if you're not.
Yeah, you're lucky if that's what doesn't happen.
And they might say something like, well, don't worry about that. We'll just advertise more back in. And there's a limit that goes on for a certain time. And then you run out of those people.
Private equity, if they really knew how to grow a practice, they wouldn't be buying yours. Because I know how to do it. I've done it many times with people, start a practice from scratch, and in 16 months, it's doing 2 million, 2.2 million, 2.5 million on 600,000. Why would I spend 1.8 million on your practice that's doing 1.8 million when I can do it? No, it's because they don't know really how to grow a practice.
You can't make that happen.
The private equities that start to really learn about growing a practice stop buying practices. That's what happens. Because if they really knew how to grow a practice, they wouldn't be buying them for.
They certainly wouldn't overpay.
No. So
just a word too about that self-esteem issue. There's a part of us that believes that 40 years of doing something should entitle us to something at the end. What did I do this for? Gosh, people are offering me peanuts for a practice that I built over 40 years. How often have you seen this? Some person wakes up one day and realizes their best years are behind them. I'm old. My equipment's worn out. I don't know anything about internet marketing. I don't have the cutting edge internet or the technology or whatever. Where's mine? I mean, I built this practice. One thing you need to understand, the concept of a dental practice pays as you go along. Wes, you were in the sports industry. You were a baseball player at the professional level. You earn your money while you're playing. There's nothing you don't get to sell your membership at the end.
Right.
So let's say you made 10 million a year as a player, you better put something aside. Dentistry is no different. If you own a dry cleaner, you might make a fairly paltry income, maybe 80 or 90,000 a year, kind of like wages. But at the end, you've got so many clients, you sell it for $4 or $5 million. Dentistry isn't like that.
Yeah.
Dentistry pays as you go, kind of a cash and carry thing. Whereas private equity DSOs, they come along and revive that hope that there's a big payout at the end. And what we're here to tell you is, yes, it comes at a tremendous cost.
I would say for the vast majority of the people that I see happy with their private equity deal are people that really struggled with managing people, really hated it, just want to be a dentist, and really they typically don't own a practice very long. They hate it so much, so they might really only be owners for 5, 6, 7, 8 years and realize it's just not for them. This is a great thing for that person. But for people that have owned a practice for 20, 30 years, yeah, you might not like to manage people, but you've been successful at it for the most part.
My question too is,
yeah.
Where does this savings go? Because the theory is we're going to have this incredible buying power of 40 or 140 or 440 practices to buy supplies. Who gets that savings? Is there savings?
Certainly at the billion-dollar level, each half a point matters, so when you're talking about a giant company, yeah, absolutely, those little line item things matter. But for an individual office, it's almost not even worth the headache to do the extra work to save the money for most offices.
I ran into a practice, Wes, not far from me, that was one of these, it was a branded practice, and it was being run, it had been purchased from a doctor, just do what you're doing. It was now being run and overseen by somebody who had nothing to do with the dental world a year ago. And they're in here pulling all the levers and, doing the heavy equipment levers. And it was misery for that doctor.
My advice would be really think it over. Think about the things we say and think if it fits you. Are you one that doesn't like control? Is willing to, have people make decisions for you, make decisions about almost your care even. At some point, they'll dictate what materials you'll use, what labs you'll use. Even though in the beginning they promise that they won't and all that kind of stuff, but that's the kind of stuff that starts to creep in. People obviously don't like that,
We're kind of being the voice of bad experience here.
Yeah.
But I would make this comment. I have seen a number of doctors that they might actually prey on. Some of them, that's probably a few of them, that's probably an accurate term. They're preying on older doctors who actually are over the hill, where the practice is going down, worn out equipment, worn out technology, bad location. And they're kind of hoping this is the last chance, last go round for them. Even those people, some of them have been at this so long, they're smart enough to smell a bad deal. In other words, they're asking the right questions and they're voiding off some of these offers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So if you're curious about your practice, what you think you should do with it, if you talk to DSOs, weren't very happy, there are other options. There's the retire in practice, where you just slow down and you extend out your years in practice by 2 or 3 years. Yeah, you lose your value, but you gain an income. So there's that model. Then there's the model that Whitehall obviously embraces and teaches and coaches on, which is where you bring on an associate and you extend out your career that way. We have another doctor there and you can take more time off, and even to the point where you bring on another doctor and you're out and you still have a practice and a business and an income. All this stuff is on the table And so if you are interested in any one of these things or have questions about your practice, Greg and I would love to talk to you. We've set aside time every week to talk to people that listen to our webinars over the weekend. So if you want to talk to us, it's no problem. Click the link. There'll be a link and you can just schedule online. You don't even have to talk to anybody, and we'll be glad to talk to you. We just ask a favor at the end. If you like everything, just go online and leave us a Google review. That's all we ask for in return.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks for listening.